The golden doors of the cathedral swung open, revealing rows of empty white chairs stretching toward an altar draped in silk and roses, $500,000 worth of roses, flown in from Amsterdam just for this moment. The air smelled of expensive perfume and betrayal. The billionaire stood frozen at the end of the aisle, his tailored suit suffocating him like a noose, his hands trembling as he stared at the phone in his grip. The screen glowed with 3 words that shattered his empire. "I'm not coming." The message was from his bride, the daughter of his greatest rival, the woman he'd spent 6 months wooing, not for love, but for revenge. The church was packed, journalists, tycoons, politicians, all waiting to witness the merger of 2 dynasties, the ultimate power play. But the bride, she was gone, and with her the billionaire's carefully constructed facade began to crack. Then the doors creaked open again. A gasp rippled through the crowd as a woman in a simple white dress, not the designer gown the bride was supposed to wear, stepped inside. Her dark hair was windswept, her bare feet peeking out from beneath the hem of her dress. Her eyes locked onto the billionaire's with a fire that made his blood run cold. She held a single yellowed envelope, its edges frayed like a secret too dangerous to keep. "You don't know me," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "But I know why she left." The billionaire's breath caught, the cameras flashed, the world held its breath. And then she smiled, a smile that wasn't joyful, but knowing. "And so do you. If this opening didn't make your heart stop, nothing will. Smash that like button, subscribe for more jaw-dropping twists, and hit the bell so you don't miss the moment this wedding turns into a war." The woman's voice echoed through the cathedral like a gunshot, silencing the murmurs of the elite crowd. The billionaire's grip on his phone tightened until his knuckles turned white. Who was she? The question burned in his mind as she took another step forward, her bare feet pressing into the marble floor, her simple white dress a stark contrast to the sea of designer suits and diamond-encrusted gowns around her. The envelope in her hand looked old, fragile, as if it held a truth so heavy it could crumble under its own weight. The cameras flashed, capturing every second of the billionaire's humiliation. His PR team would have a nightmare spinning this, but right now, he didn't care about the headlines. He only cared about the way this stranger looked at him, as if she could see straight through the polished veneer of his empire, straight into the rot beneath. "You don't know me," she repeated, her voice steady, unshaken by the dozens of eyes fixed on her. "But I know why she left." She lifted the envelope slightly, her fingers brushing against the yellowed paper. "And I know what you did." A cold sweat broke out on the billionaire's neck. What did I do? The question clawed at him, but before he could demand answers, the woman's gaze flicked to the crowd, lingering on the front row where the bride's father, his rival, sat, his face pale, his hands clenched into fists. The man's eyes were wide, his breath ragged, as if he recognized her, as if he feared her. The billionaire's stomach twisted. What the hell is going on? The woman took another step forward, close enough now that he could see the faint scar above her eyebrow, the way her jaw tightened as she spoke. 23 years ago, she began, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried through the silent cathedral. 2 baby girls were born to a woman who trusted the wrong people. One was kept, one was thrown away. Her eyes locked onto the billionaire's, unblinking. "You know which one I am." The air left the billionaire's lungs. No, the word screamed in his mind, but his lips couldn't form it. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. Not when he was so close to finally crushing his rival, to securing his legacy. The crowd erupted into gasps and whispers. The bride's father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "You weren't supposed to be here," he hissed, his voice shaking. The woman turned to him, her expression cold. "Oh, I was supposed to be here," she said, her voice dripping with bitterness. "I was supposed to be her." She gestured toward the empty space where the bride should have stood, her fingers curling into a fist. "But you decided only one daughter was worth keeping." The billionaire's mind raced. A sister, the bride had a sister, a twin, and if this woman was telling the truth, she had been abandoned, discarded like trash by the very people who were supposed to protect her. His eyes flicked to his rival, whose face was now ashen, his usual arrogance replaced by something raw and desperate. Fear. The woman turned back to the billionaire, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You think this wedding was about love? It was about power, just like everything else in your world. She held up the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. But power has a price, and today you're going to pay it. The billionaire's pulse roared in his ears. He had spent his life controlling every variable, every outcome. But this was a storm he hadn't seen coming, and it was about to destroy everything. The woman took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving his. The bride didn't run because she was scared, she said, her voice softening just enough to make the words cut deeper. She ran because she knew. She tapped the envelope against her palm. And now, so do I. The cathedral was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The billionaire's rival lunged forward, his hand outstretched as if he could snatch the envelope and the truth away. Give me that, he snarled, but the woman stepped back, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It's too late for that, she said. And then she tore the envelope open. The sound of paper tearing cut through the cathedral like a blade. The woman's fingers trembled as she pulled out a single yellowed sheet, its edges frayed from years of being hidden away. The billionaire's breath hitched as she unfolded it, the crackle of the old paper amplifying in the dead silence. His rival, his soon-to-be father-in-law, stumbled back as if the document itself were a weapon, his face twisting in a way the billionaire had never seen before. Fear, real, unfiltered fear. The woman's voice was steady, but there was a tremor beneath it, a current of something raw and untamed. This, she said, holding the paper aloft so the crowd could see, is the agreement your family signed 23 years ago. Her eyes flicked to the billionaire, then to his rival, her gaze sharp enough to draw blood. One daughter would be raised in wealth, in power. The other would be erased, as if she never existed. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The billionaire's mind raced. An agreement. He had heard rumors, of course, whispers of a deal made in the dead of night, a pact between his father and his rival to secure their empires. But he had never believed it. Not like this. Not with something so monstrous at its core. The woman's fingers tightened around the paper. My mother was a servant in your house, she said, her voice cracking just slightly before she steadied it again. She didn't know she was carrying twins, but they knew. She nodded toward the billionaire's rival, her lips curling in disgust. And they decided only one of us was worth keeping. The billionaire's stomach churned. He had spent his life believing he was untouchable, that his wealth and power could bend the world to his will. But this was a sin so deep, so personal, it made his skin crawl. He glanced at his rival, whose face was now a mask of horror. The man's hands were shaking, his usual composure shattered. You don't understand, he choked out, his voice barely audible. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The woman let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Oh, I understand perfectly, she said. I understand that I was left in an orphanage with nothing but a name scribbled on a piece of paper. I understand that while my sister grew up in mansions, I grew up wondering why my own mother didn't want me. Her voice broke, just for a second, before she lifted her chin, her eyes blazing. And I understand that today was supposed to be the final piece of your little game, the wedding that would merge your families and secure your power forever. She took a step closer to the billionaire, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire cathedral. But she knew, my sister knew, and she couldn't go through with it. The billionaire's mind reeled. The bride, his bride, had known about her sister. Had she been in contact with her all this time? Had she been planning this? His fists clenched at his sides. He had been played, manipulated, and the worst part? He hadn't even seen it coming. The woman's gaze flicked to the empty space where the bride should have been standing. She left you a message, she said, reaching into the pocket of her dress and pulling out a small, crumpled note. She said you'd understand. The billionaire's heart pounded in his chest as she unfolded the note and read it aloud. I can't marry you. Not when our families are built on lies. Not when my sister is out there living a life we stole from her. I won't be part of this anymore. The woman's voice wavered just for a moment before she looked up at the billionaire, her eyes filled with a mix of triumph and sorrow. She chose me over you. Over all of this. The words hit the billionaire like a physical blow. He had spent his entire life believing that money and power could buy him anything. Loyalty, respect, even love. But this was something he couldn't control. Something he couldn't buy. His bride had chosen her long-lost sister over him, over the empire he had promised her, over the life of luxury she had been raised to expect. The woman took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the note. She also left you a warning, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She said if you ever try to find her, if you ever try to drag her back into this world, she'll release everything. The agreement, the records, the truth. She leaned in just slightly, her voice so low only the billionaire could hear it. And trust me, you don't want that truth to get out. The billionaire's mind raced. He had spent years carefully crafting his image, his legacy. If this got out, if the world found out what his family had done, it would all come crashing down. His empire, his reputation, everything. The woman stepped back, her expression unreadable. So, she said, her voice carrying through the cathedral once more. What's it going to be, billionaire? Are you going to let us walk away, or are you going to destroy what's left of your world trying to stop us? The cathedral was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The billionaire's rival was still frozen in his seat, his face ashen, his hands trembling. The crowd watched, breathless, waiting for the billionaire's next move. The cameras flashed, capturing every second of his humiliation, his defeat. And then, from the back of the cathedral, a sound. The doors creaked open. The billionaire's head snapped up, his heart pounding in his chest. Standing in the doorway was the bride, her wedding dress torn at the hem, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. She looked at her sister, her expression softening just slightly before she turned her gaze to the billionaire. I meant every word, she said, her voice steady. I'm done. And then she turned and walked away. The woman, her sister, didn't hesitate. She followed, her head held high, her steps sure. The doors closed behind them with a final, echoing click. The billionaire stood there, his chest heaving, his mind racing. He could chase them. He could drag them back, force them to comply, use his power to bury the truth forever. But as he looked around the cathedral, at the shocked faces of his guests, at the cameras still flashing, at his rival's broken expression, he realized something terrifying. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to do. What would you do in his place? Chase the truth, or let it destroy you? Drop your answer in the comments below. The cathedral doors slammed shut behind the sisters, the echo reverberating through the stunned silence like a funeral knell for the billionaire's empire. His hands clenched into fists, his breath coming in ragged gasps as the weight of the moment crashed over him. The crowd still gaped, their whispers a low hum of disbelief, but none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the truth, raw, ugly, and now undeniable, hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. His rival, the bride's father, finally collapsed back into his seat, his face buried in his hands. The man who had spent decades as the billionaire's greatest enemy now looked like a broken shell. We never meant for it to go this far, he choked out, his voice muffled but audible in the suffocating quiet. It was supposed to protect them. The billionaire's laugh was sharp, bitter. Protect them? He turned on his rival, his voice a venomous hiss. You sold one of your own daughters like she was nothing. You let her grow up in an orphanage while the other lived in a palace. That's not protection, that's monstrous. The words hung between them, heavy and irreversible. The rival lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted. You think I don't know that? He snapped, his voice cracking. Every day I wondered if she was alive, if she was happy, if she hated me. He let out a shuddering breath. And now she's back, and she's going to destroy everything. The billionaire's mind raced. He had spent his life believing he was above consequences, that his wealth and influence could shield him from the fallout of his family's sins. But this was a reckoning he couldn't outrun. The sisters had the proof, the agreement, the records, the truth, and if they released it, his empire would crumble. His name would be dragged through the mud. His legacy would be reduced to ashes. And yet, he looked at the closed doors, at the space where the sisters had stood moments before. The bride, his almost wife, had chosen her sister over him, over everything he could offer. That kind of loyalty, that kind of love. It was something he had never understood, never wanted to understand. But now, standing in the wreckage of his carefully constructed world, he felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest. Envy. The rival's voice pulled him back. "We have to stop them," he said, his tone desperate. "We have to get that document back. We have to—" "No," the billionaire interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. The rival stared at him, stunned. "What?" "No," the billionaire repeated, louder this time, his voice steadying as the weight of his decision settled over him. "We don't stop them. We let them go." The rival's face twisted in disbelief. "Are you insane? If they release that agreement, we're finished. Our families, our businesses, our names—" "I know," the billionaire cut in, his voice cold. "And I don't care." The words shocked even him. He had spent his entire life fighting for his name, for his power, for the legacy his father had built. But in this moment, standing in the ruins of his own making, he realized something terrifying. He was tired. Tired of the lies, the manipulation, the endless cycle of revenge and control. He had spent so long chasing power that he had forgotten what it meant to be human. The rival's face flushed with rage. "You're a fool," he spat. "You'll lose everything." The billionaire turned to him, his expression unreadable. "I already have." For a heartbeat, neither man moved. Then the billionaire turned away from his rival, away from the crowd, away from the life he had spent decades building. He walked toward the cathedral doors, his steps slow, deliberate. The crowd parted before him, their whispers following in his wake. He didn't look back. Outside, the air was crisp, the sky a clear, merciless blue. The billionaire took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the first taste of freedom he had ever known. He didn't know where the sisters had gone. He didn't know if they would release the agreement, if they would burn his world to the ground. And for the first time, he realized he didn't care. Because for the first time in his life, he was choosing something real over power. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, hesitant. "Hello?" The billionaire's throat tightened. "It's me," he said, his voice rough. "I need to see you." A pause. Then softly, "Why?" He closed his eyes, the weight of his next words pressing down on him. "Because I was wrong, and I need to make it right." The line was silent for a long moment. Then, "Where are you?" The billionaire looked up at the cathedral, its golden doors gleaming in the sunlight, a monument to the life he was leaving behind. "I'm exactly where I need to be," he said. And for the first time in his life, he meant it. The phone call ended, but the billionaire didn't move. He stood there, in the shadow of the cathedral, the weight of his past pressing down on him like a tombstone. The streets around him buzzed with life, cars honking, people laughing, the world moving forward while he felt frozen in time. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the center of anything. He was just a man, standing alone with nothing but the truth and the wreckage of his choices. He didn't know where the sisters had gone. He didn't know if they would expose him, if they would burn his empire to the ground. But as he walked away from the cathedral, he realized something profound. It didn't matter, not anymore, because for the first time, He wasn't running from something. He was walking toward it. The woman who answered the door wasn't who he expected. She was older now, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes weary but kind. The woman he had wronged decades ago, the mother of the twins, the servant his family had discarded like trash. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before stepping aside to let him in. The house was small, modest, nothing like the mansions he was used to. But it was warm, alive. The walls were lined with photographs, smiling faces, birthdays, holidays, real moments, real love. His chest ached as he recognized the younger version of the woman who had walked into the cathedral, the twin who had been erased. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. "You're late," she said, her voice quiet but not unkind. The billionaire swallowed hard. "I know." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "Why are you here?" He didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense, not one that could justify the years of silence, the cruelty, the lies. So he told her the truth. "Because I needed to see you. To tell you." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry." The words hung between them, fragile and raw. The woman didn't move, she didn't forgive him. She didn't even acknowledge the apology. But after a long silence, she nodded toward the chair across from her. "Sit down." They talked for hours. Not about money, not about power, not about the past, but about her. About the daughter he had never known, the life she had lived, the woman she had become. The woman told him stories. About the orphanage, about the nights she cried herself to sleep wondering why she wasn't enough. About the day she finally found her sister and realized she wasn't alone. The billionaire listened, and for the first time in his life he heard. When he finally stood to leave, the woman walked him to the door. She didn't hug him. She didn't call him father. But as he turned to go, she touched his arm, just lightly. "She's happy now," she said. "My daughter. She's happy, and that's all that matters." The billionaire nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He stepped out into the fading light, the door closing softly behind him. The next morning, the headlines screamed of scandal. The agreement had been leaked. The truth was out. His empire was crumbling, his name dragged through the mud, his legacy in tatters. But as he sat in his empty penthouse, staring at the city skyline, he felt something he hadn't expected. Relief. He picked up his phone and dialed his lawyer. "Sell it all," he said. "Everything?" the lawyer asked, stunned. "Everything," the billionaire repeated. "I don't want any of it." Months later, he stood in front of a small building on the outskirts of the city. A sign hung above the door. The Twin Hearts Foundation, support for families torn apart. Inside, the woman who had walked into the cathedral was helping a young girl with her homework. She looked up as he entered, her expression guarded. "I brought something," he said, holding out a check. She didn't take it. "We don't need your money." "I know," he said, "but I need you to have it." She studied him for a long moment, then finally nodded. "Fine, but not for me. For them." She gestured to the children around her. The billionaire smiled. It was the first real smile he'd allowed himself in years. That night, he sat on a park bench, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and red. His phone buzzed with a message from his former rival, now just another broken man. "They're going to destroy us." The billionaire typed back a single word. "Good." He turned off his phone and slipped it into his pocket. The world would call him a fool, a failure, a man who lost everything. But as he looked up at the stars, he knew the truth. He had finally found something worth keeping. This story was about power, betrayal, and the courage to choose truth over lies. But now we want to hear from you. What would you have done in the billionaire's place? Would you have chased the sisters to protect your empire, or would you have let it all burn for a chance at redemption? Drop your answer in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that will break your heart and put it back together.